Server actions are amazing. They simplify a lot of things, but also they might be the reason why your application is slow, buggy, and secretly screaming for help.
No! God, please, no! No!
Why? Because using them is easy, but using them right, like fetching data in a server action, works. But please don't. Still using useState for loading states when using server actions? Come on. Doing auth checks right in your server action? Seriously? But don't worry, in this video we will look at the most common mistakes that you make when using server actions. And more importantly, I will show you how to fix them. So let's check it out. So right here we first of all have our form to create a new blog article. This form calls our server action, and then underneath my form I fetch my data and I render my blog articles. Let's also quickly look at the code. So I first of all have my page.tsx. This is a server component. This means inside of here I fetch my data, then I render my blog creation form, and I also render my data itself. This means my blog articles. Let's look at our blog creation form in more detail. So this is first of all a client component. This is super important because this also creates a common problem, but we'll come to that a bit later on. Then inside of here, I set up client-side form validation. This means we have React hook form set up. And then in my return statement, I render my form. I have my form component, my form element, and then all of my inputs for the title, content, thumbnail, URL, and stuff like that. Then my form calls this onSubmit function that you see right here. And this onSubmit function calls my create post server action. This means if I open my actions file, you'll see this server action. This file is marked as useServer, which means all of the functions which are exported from here will convert to a server action. And then this create post function just creates a mutation with Prisma, the ORM. And then I revalidate my path. This means I revalidate my cache. And then at the end, I just return my data. So what's exactly, or what are the mistakes that I made right here? Because the code itself isn't bad. And when I started using Next.js, this is how I created my forms and, in other words, my server actions. So let's start with mistake number one. And that's that our server action is actually a public endpoint. So here's the thing. A lot of people now know about this, but I would say a few months ago, most people didn't know that Next.js or server actions expose public endpoints. So if you go to the documentation and if you honestly scroll to the complete bottom, as you see right here, you'll see by default when a server action is created and exported, it creates a public HTTP endpoint and should be treated with the same security assumptions and authorization checks. So what does this mean for us? Well, in theory, if you open the inspector and if I first of all fill out this form, and if I now open the network tab and submit this form, you'll see that we will do or create a post request. So here we have our request. And here's the interesting thing. If you scroll a bit to the bottom, you'll find the next action ID. This is this one right here. In theory, if I would copy this next action ID, I could now create a post request without ever touching this UI. And again, I set up client-side validation. So instead of passing a thumbnail URL, the user could try to pass some sort of script, which I don't want. This means we want to now add server-side validation. This is relatively simple to implement. So I already have a .zot schemas file. As you see, I want to get the title, content, published, thumbnail, stuff like that. I also added error messages. And now right here in my server action, I can check that the data which I get through my params corresponds to my .zot schema. So inside of here, I can say, hey, let's get a constant result. And this will be equal to my form schema.savePass. And then I can pass my values as an argument. Our result could either be successful or not successful. What do I mean with that? Well, if the values don't correspond to our .zot schema, then this won't be successful. So let's do an if check and let's say, hey, if result is not successful, so result.success, and then inside of here I will just throw a new error and I will pass for the message validation was not successful. And voila, we are now finished with server-side validation. This means we check that our data corresponds to our sort schema. If not, we throw a new error, but if everything is fine, we allow the user to create a brand new mutation. Here's a very interesting thing. This throw new error creates a huge problem, but we will come to that a bit later on in the video. For now, I want to continue with a different mistake. So right here I have my block creation form and I have this useState is loading, set is loading. This is just my loading state. And then in my onSubmit function I have my try catch finally statement. This means in my try statement I set is loading to true because we are right now submitting the form. Then we have the finally statement and inside of here I set is loading to false because our form submission is finished. We submitted everything. So if you look at this code, is it incorrect? No, that's what most of us do. But here's the thing. In my page.tsx, I fetch my data, get articles. And then if I go to my get articles function, I get my data with Prisma. That's nothing new. We already know that. But what's the problem right here? Well, let's again submit the form first of all. So please follow my cursor. If I click on submit, I have this pending state, then I have my toast and I instantly get my result or my new block article right here. Because again, if I go back to my code base and open the actions file, I revalidate my path. This means I revalidate my cache and I get my new data. Since get articles or since my data set is relatively small, this function, this query is relatively fast. It's almost instant. But if I add a delay of 3 seconds with the set timeout function, we will have a huge problem. Let me again show it to you. Again, follow my cursor and if I click on submit, our pending state is finished. But where are my block articles? I had to wait 3 seconds until I got my data. My submit button was finished, but my data wasn't loaded. Why the hell do we have such a problem? So here's the thing, I myself for a long time did not know that. useState does not actually check this revalidate path because revalidate path internally uses the transition hook, the use transition hook. This means our useState hook pretty much checks until here and then it does not really, I guess, take revalidate path into account. So what do I mean? Well, this revalidate path in the background uses the use transition hook and this is a React hook that lets you render a part of the UI in the background. And I must say the React documentation sometimes is really trash because this says a lot without saying anything. The use transition hook is pretty much just a hook which allows you to show a pending state. That's all. This means instead of using this useState hook is loading, I should probably instead use this use transition hook because this use transition hook would now also take our revalidate path function into account. So let's rewrite this code a bit. What we want to now do is first of all set up the hook. This means I want to delete my useState and then we can create a constant. We want to again get our getter and setter. This is pending and start transition. This will be equal to use transition imported from React. And now let's first of all delete our set is loading. I can delete my finally statement and I want to grab my whole try catch statement in the start transition function. So let's wrap everything inside of here and now we are kind of finished. So now this code runs in our transition. So I can use this is pending boolean. Let's scroll to the button again and instead of is loading, I will pass is pending. Again, follow my cursor. If I click on submit, we have our pending state. I got my toast, but I still have my pending state. And the pending state only goes away once we get our data. Wow, isn't this cool? So what does this mean? Well, useState is something that you don't want to use. It does not really work in the Next.js context because it does not take the revalidate path function into account. This means you should rather use the start transition hook. And the nice thing is also you can use multiple transitions. So if you have multiple functions, then just create multiple transitions. So now we are finished with our use transition hook and now we can continue with the next mistake. So as we all know, server actions are public endpoints. Nothing new. But here's the thing. If a server action is a public endpoint, then we want to also check that the user has the correct permissions, or in other words, that the user is authorized to create a new post right here to call the server action. And this is where Auth comes into play. So in this video, we will implement Kind together. Kind is the sponsor of this video and my favorite Auth solution. But here's what we'll do. We will implement authentication. We will check that the user is authenticated, and we will also check that the user is authorized to create a post. And here's the interesting thing. I think most people would assume that checking this is relatively simple. You will just call your API, or in this case Kind, and see is user authenticated. And that's what we will do at the base layer, but we won't do it right here in the server action, because this is also a huge mistake. What exactly do I mean with this? Well, let's implement authentication and then I will show it to you. So let's head over to Kind and let's first of all sign in. Once signed in, you want to create a new business with a business name, Kind domain, number of employees and region. Then we can open our business. Here we have a little onboarding guide. So I want to use Kind with my code base. I use Next.js as my framework, and I want to allow the user to sign in with email, Google, and then also GitHub. Then we are almost finished and I want to connect Kind to my code base. So let's click on connect, and the first step is to install the SDK. So that's exactly what I will do. Once finished, we want to continue by updating our environment variables. So let's copy this, let's go back, and then we can paste this in our env file. Inside of here, we store our client ID, client secret, and a few other relevant environment variables, secrets, which Kind needs. We also have our post login redirect URL. That's where we redirect the user after successful login, and currently we redirect the user to /dashboard. Let's change this to our index page. The next step is to create a route handler. Let's copy the route structure, and also here's a little trick. Instead of creating a new folder, you can create a new file, paste it inside of here, and this will automatically create a route structure for you. Then this will be a route.ts file. We can now copy this code and paste it inside of here. And this route handler will allow us to interact with Kind. This means log in, log out, and stuff like that. We are now almost finished, and the last step is to set up the Kind Auth provider, and this will give us access to the Kind Auth data in our application, and it will also ensure that the tokens are refreshed when needed. So we want to create a new Auth provider file. I can then copy this code, paste it in my Auth provider file, which I currently store in my components. And then we want to wrap our whole application, this means our layout, in our Auth provider, which we just created. And now we are finished with Kind. Now we want to allow the user to log in and sign up. You will see that we can use the login link and register link components to start the Auth flow. So let's copy the import statement for both of these components. I can paste it on the top, and then we can use the register and login link. So instead of using the button component, I will use the login link, and for the sign up button, I will use the register link component. If I save this and again go back, you'll see that we have our two buttons right here, but they are not styled very nicely because the two components are headless. Therefore, we can add a class name of button variants to style the two components like shared CN buttons. This means if I again go back, we now have beautiful buttons. Let's now sign up. As you see, we got redirected to the Kind hosted authentication page, and I can authenticate either with Google, GitHub, or with email. Let's continue with GitHub. And as you see, I got redirected back to my index page. If I open my inspector and go to my application, you will find inside of here an access token. So right here in my cookies, I have an access token, and this means our authentication process was successful. Nevertheless, we still show a login and sign up button. So in our navbar, we can get the user session and check if the user has a valid session. This means we can do a constant, the structured, and this will be equal to get kind server session. Get kind server session is a hook which exposes functions which only run on the server side. We want to get the get user function, and the get user function is a promise. So let's do a constant user equals to await get user. Our user could either be defined or it could be null if there's no authenticated user. So let's create a ternary, and I will say, hey, If we have a user, then let's render the logout link component. If we don't have a user, let's render our login and register link components. This means if I again go back, we have our logout link component. If I open my actions file, I can check that our user has a valid session. So above our form schema.savePath, so before our server-side validation, we can again get our getUser function from the getKindServerSession hook. Let's again await our user or our getUser function, and then we can do an if check and say, hey, if there's no user, then let's throw a new error. But wait, we actually just made two huge mistakes. What the hell am I talking about? Well, let's start with the first issue, the more simple issue. So currently we get our user session and then we throw the error, right? But what is if we create 5 more server actions? Well, we will just copy this code and then paste it in the new server action. That's fine. I mean, sure, you shouldn't repeat yourself, but this isn't the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that you now have multiple sources of truth. Because let's imagine the following. Right now, I want to return user is not authorized, but in 1 month, I want to say user not found. What do I do now? Do I go to every server action and update the error? Well, I will have to do that, but this isn't a good practice. Again, you will have multiple sources of truth. So how do you fix this mistake? Well, it's relatively simple. You want to use the data access layer. So right here, I have a data folder, then I can create a user folder in the data folder, and then we will create a new file, which will be require-user.ts. Then I can just copy this code, go back and paste it. So now we have a new function, require user. I get my user session. If there's no user, I throw a new error. But if we have a user, then I just return the user. Also, since this is a function which should only run or be pretty much consumed from the server side, I can also import server only. So this now means if a user tries to call this function from the client side, from a client component, we will throw a new error because server only says, hey, this function is only allowed to be consumed from the server side. This means in my actions file, I can delete this code and just call await require user. So now we have a single source of truth. This means if I want to update my authorization logic, then I can go to my function and update it right here. No need to update every function individually, so every server action. But I mentioned that we made 2 mistakes. This was only one mistake. What's the second mistake? Well, the second mistake is throwing a new error. Huh? What the hell am I talking about? So here's the thing. In my block creation form, I currently have my try catch statement. I catch my error and then I return my toast. For the message, I return my error message. This means in this case, user not authorized. Let's quickly test it out. So if I click on submit, you'll see right here, user not authorized. This is the message which we throw, the error message. But why is this a mistake? Well, it's a mistake because we are currently in our development environment. But how would this work in our production environment? Let me show you. In our terminal, I can stop my dev server, then I can run pnpm run build. This will build our project, and now I can run my production build with pnpm run start. And again, follow my cursor, I will click on submit. And what is this? An error occurred in the server components render. The specific message is omitted in production builds to avoid leaking sensitive details. A digest property is included on this error instance, which may provide additional details about the nature of the error. And if I also again go back, then you'll see in my terminal error user not authorized. So what's exactly the problem? Well, the thing is, this is a security measure by React. In production scenarios, it does not render your error message. It omits it for security reasons. So how do we fix this problem? Well, it's also relatively simple. Let's go back to our actions file, and instead of just having this standard code, we will wrap everything in a try catch statement. And then in my catch statement, I won't throw a new error. No, instead I will return an object with a status or, for example, error. And then also I will return a message, and this message will just say something went wrong. For the try statement, I won't change anything. This is fine enough, but I'm still not finished because in my catch statement, I return a status, but in my try statement, I just return my data. I don't want to return my data. Instead, I want to also return a success message. This means I will also return an object with a status of success and message of post created successfully. But wait, I just created a new mistake again. What's the problem? Well, writing this return message is relatively error prone because there are only two statuses, success and error. But if I misspell success, well, then we just have a third status. This does not work. So here's what you should do instead. Create a create post response interface with a status and message. And then for my function, I will add a return type, and this will be a promise of create post response. This means I'm now required to return something. If I delete this return, we get an error. So let's again return a new object, and then inside of here, if I click on Control Spacebar, I get my status. I only get two options, either error or success. This is success, and let's again add our message. So this is finished. We now have our try catch statement, we have our return type, but we are still not finished because in our block creation form, we want to check for these statuses. So let's say right here, constant data equals to await create post, and then underneath my form.reset, I can create an if statement. So if data.status is equal to success, then let's return a toast.success. If this is not true, then let's return a toast.error. If I again rebuild my project, and then let's again start our project with pnpm run start, and then again add all of the info, you'll see something went wrong. So my require user function still throws a new error, but in my actions file, I catch this error and I return an error message, and with that, we can render the actual message in our toast. And also for this client-side try catch, I would right here also just return a toast.error and I would say something went wrong. And voila, we are finished. And of course, in a real production environment, I would also make the error handling more in-depth because currently this is very basic error handling. So in the catch statement, you could, for example, check, hey, is the error an instance of a Prisma error? So is it a database error and stuff like that. Also, the error messages could be more in-depth. Nevertheless, I still think you all understood what I tried to teach you right here. So now there are only two more mistakes that I want to show you. So I updated my schema. We have a model user and a model post. These two models have a one-to-many relationship. One user can have multiple posts. Also, my user stores the property post count. So how many articles has the user created? And if I open my server action again, you'll see inside of here, I now first of all create my new post, and then I have a second query which updates my user with the new post count. So I increment by 1. And if you look at these two mutations, where is the mistake? Well, the mistake is relatively simple. These two mutations are dependent on each other. If the post creation fails, then I don't want to update the user. If the update user mutation fails, I don't want to create a new post. These two mutations pretty much should be handled like one mutation. So how do we fix this problem? Because currently, if this fails, then this will still run. If this fails, this will still run. I will still add my data in the database even though this was a failure. So how do we fix this? Well, thankfully, it's actually relatively simple. We want to wrap this whole or these two mutations in a database transaction. So Prisma has this nice transaction API, and it guarantees that both mutations either happen or neither one will happen. So if this fails, the second mutation, then the whole transaction will fail. If both succeed, then our transaction will succeed. This is a security measure, and this is something that most people don't do, which is a huge mistake. Dependent mutations should always be wrapped in a transaction. And this also guarantees that there are no side effects which happen, because you only store data in your database which is successful, if you understand what I mean. So now we fixed another mistake, but there's one more mistake that we will have to fix. So recently I saw that some people tried to fetch data with server actions. So here I created an export async function, get posts, I have my Prisma query, and I return my posts. If I open my page.tsx, you all know I currently use the get articles function, which is stored in my data access layer. So instead of using my get articles, I will now use my get posts server action. Let's import it. And what do we see right here? Well, we get our data. So Jan, are you trying to tell me that I can fetch data with server actions? Yes, you can, but you shouldn't. Why is that? Well, as you all know, server actions are public endpoints. They are post requests, not get requests. What does this mean for us? Well, if we have a post request, we can't really cache this data. We will have caching issues. Also, server actions don't run in parallel. So if you have multiple queries, then you have to wait for each query individually. You don't want that. So please, even though it works, even though you can fetch data using a server action, you shouldn't. Please delete it. Server actions are only there to mutate data. Of course, in a server action, you can fetch data to create a mutation. So for example, I could say, hey, I need more information about my user. Let's fetch some user data. Sure, you can do that, but you want to never use a server action to only fetch data and return it. Server actions are there to mutate data. And yeah, everyone, that's it. We now covered everything that I wanted to cover in this video. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you could learn a lot from this video. And please don't forget to like and subscribe. This would mean a lot to me and my heart. So please do it. Thank you, Kind, for making this video possible. It's very cool to create such cool videos with such a cool company. And yeah, please don't forget to again like and subscribe. Enjoy your day. See you in the next video. Over and out. Bye. Okay, friends, time to edit this video. See you.